Hey, as I've studied the Sermon on the Mount over this winter, one word keeps coming back to me again and again. And I think, actually, it's become a favorite word of mine. And I think it really gets to the very heart of this sermon. The word is integrity. Integrity means who we say we are and who we really are, they are in alignment. They're aligned. They're the same thing. They mirror one another. The opposite of integrity in the Sermon on the Mount is hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is mentioned 4 times inside of the sermon. And so therefore it makes me think, wow, if hypocrisy refers to falsehood, then certainly I want to be a person of integrity, because that means what's inside of my life is the same as what you see on the outside. So in chapter 5:21, verse 21, Jesus says, well, look, it's great for you not to be a murderer. I like that idea. But what if we furnish our imaginations with anger? What if we imagine ourselves killing someone else with words? What happens then? A kingdom life is a life of integrity. In 5:33, Jesus says, well, look, be careful about making these public declarations of honesty. Because what really matters is whether or not you are honest in those secret places. What if secretly you are deceitful? That invalidates everything. So Jesus says in 5:37, let your yes be yes and let your no be no. And that's what Bill talked about last week. A kingdom life is a life of integrity. I'm sure that if Jesus were here with us now and talking about this, he could extend that whole discussion. He could go to the 8th commandment and he could say, you have heard that it was said, do not steal. And that is all fair and good. But the question is, what do we do when no one is looking? The question is, what do we do when it's only us and our hearts? See, a person of integrity has a reputation for living a consistent life of righteousness. That's a person of integrity. They are reliable. They are consistent. And that is why they become, as Jesus says in this sermon, the light of the world. Why? Because people trust those who have integrity. And this is why this word is so important to me. I value and trust people who have integrity. Amen? It's exactly what it is. I want to be one of those people. And for me, I would imagine it this way. If someday anyone bothers to sum up my life when I'm 90 years old, I hope they will not refer to how often I went to church. I hope they are not going to refer to maybe what I did with my money, or how many books were written, or how many speeches or sermons were given. I would be happy to win this one word. He pursued a kingdom life, and that life had integrity. Would you like that said about you? You pursued a kingdom life, and that life had integrity. Be marvelous. That's the Sermon on the Mount. Tonight we come to probably one of the most difficult passages in the Sermon on the Mount that talks about this matter of integrity. It's in Matthew 5, beginning at verse 27. And here you're going to see a fairly complicated picture on the screen, because we need to look very carefully at what Jesus is saying. We'll walk through it slowly. Jesus says this: you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. Now, Jesus is quoting the 7th commandment found there in Exodus chapter 20. But then he goes on, I tell you that anyone who looks, by the way, the verb that is used right there is a continuous verb, and it means who habitually looks all the time, who looks at a woman lustfully, skip down, has already committed adultery with her in his heart. What's very interesting about this passage is throughout Jesus' Jewish world, when it came to matters of seduction and enticement, the guilt and responsibility was always placed on women in Jesus' world. But here what's fascinating is that Jesus is reversing it and placing the onus on men. Now, go back up to what Jesus says. I tell you, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully, and the thing is that this is an adverb in our English translations, and all translators wrestle with how to translate this. And so therefore, I want to show you what some leading scholars do with this, because there's a nuance I don't want us to miss tonight. Here is Don Hagner, a very famous scholar who works on the Gospel of Matthew, teaches at Fuller Seminary in their doctoral program. Whoever looks at a woman with the purpose of lusting after her or desiring her or having her, that's the phrase, Don says. Here's Robert Gulick. Whoever looks at a woman in order to desire having her sexually, that's Robert Gulick. Skip down to Dick France, English New Testament scholar. Whoever looks at someone's wife, the Greek word is actually gune, and it can be wife or woman. It goes either way. Jesus has just talked about adultery, and therefore, in Jesus' world, you're going to have people either betrothed or married. So therefore, he says, this is about looking at someone's wife and wanting to have sex with her. Now, the English Standard Version, which is in the center of all of this, gets the nuance exactly right. Everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent. Now, I know that I have people in here who are reading Greek. You've got your Greek New Testaments on your lap because you showed them to me afterwards. Bear with me for a moment. You see, there isn't an adverb here, lustfully. Instead, it is what we call a purpose clause. Stay with me. There is a prepositional phrase here, pros, if you see it there in Greek, ta epithumesai. That means you are looking habitually for one purpose. And the purpose is to epithumesai. Now, in Exodus 20, verse 17, this is an echo of the 10th commandment, where Jesus is echoing the 10th commandment. Thou shalt not covet your neighbor's gune. In Greek. The word covet, you see it, I've given it to you in Greek right here, is the same word as Jesus using here in Matthew. So therefore, Jesus is talking about someone who habitually looks at a woman or someone's wife, and he is looking so that he might possess what he sees. That's the nuance. Well, if you do this, you have already committed adultery. So Jesus says, if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out, throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Now, I don't think we have to go far to imagine that Jesus is using a little hyperbole. I hope so, or else we are going to have a lot of blind people in church. Dallas Willard, the great Christian writer, said it this way. He said, you could have 2 stumps for hands and be totally blind and still have a problem with this issue. Makes sense to me. No doubt what Jesus is saying right here is, look, whatever it takes, if you have this as an issue and you are struggling with this as an issue, then do whatever it takes to impede what moves you in this direction. I have a friend of mine who says, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do to stop this in my own life. He travels all of the time in business. He checks into hotels all of the time. And when he checks into a hotel, he says at the desk, I didn't know you could do this. I would like all of the adult content on my TV blocked in my room. It is his personal decision to protect himself from what he knows is his own frailty. I don't think it's an accident that Jesus refers to eyes and hand at the end of this teaching. Those are the things that will lead us astray. All right, there we go. There we have it. So you can see this is all about purposeful looking. Now, few passages in the Sermon on the Mount have given teenage boys and others more mind-numbing guilt. And I would imagine we could probably take a little license here and say this also is about women who have had the same experience. Fair enough? But let's be absolutely clear about one thing. This passage is not about attraction. Our attraction to those sexually who are of the opposite sex, this reflex is God-given. We just simply have to learn to discipline these things. It isn't about attraction. This is about intention. It is about the plan or fantasy to get sexual satisfaction. That's what this passage is about. So Dallas Willard, that wonderful writer, in The Divine Conspiracy says, he calls it the look. It is when, he writes, our private fantasies take over our thoughts and we think about a sexual encounter with another person. So what Jesus is actually doing here is he's linking the 7th commandment about adultery, and he's actually moving it over to the 10th commandment about coveting. And he says, we should not have lives of sexual coveting. That's the notion. This is desiring someone so that you can have them. And we obsess on that having. You look in order to have what you think you might enjoy. This is precisely what David did with Bathsheba. In other words, he had a friend who had a beautiful wife. He does not just simply notice her, appreciate her beauty, and is attracted to her. He instead makes a plan. He makes a plan that destroys his friend Uriah's marriage. He executes that plan by killing Uriah, and then he has Bathsheba. That's what happens. It is those who obsess about that which they want, and they make a plan to go and get it. In the New Testament, it is Herod Antipas, Matthew chapter 14. Herod Antipas, who was ruling Galilee, his brother Philip has a beautiful wife. Her name is Herodias. He therefore sees her, not simply attracted to her, but instead intends to take her. He destroys his brother's marriage. He takes Herodias. John the Baptist condemns it all. And that is why John the Baptist died. The great New Testament scholar Craig Keener says this: Jesus is referring not to noticing a person's beauty, but imbibing on it, meditating on it, seeking to possess it. So therefore, what we have Jesus doing is exactly what he did in Matthew 5:21. The question isn't so much about killing, the question is about what's going on inside of your heart. That's the 6th commandment. He is not only interested in outward expressions of righteousness, he is interested in inward desires. For Jesus, righteousness is not just simply controlling behavior. Righteousness is about the transformation of the inner heart, the inner self. So being a Christ follower is not just about disciplining your life. It is about transforming your desires so that your righteousness is complete inside and out. And that is sexual integrity. Righteousness inside and out. So the first thing Jesus says is the obvious. The covenant of marriage is sacred. There is a mysterious sacred union, a sexual union between a man and a woman. The two shall become one flesh, and this cannot be violated. Jesus holds up the sanctity of marriage. To violate it is adultery. It's to violate sacred unions. But then Jesus says the less than obvious. He is interested in disciples who understand not only the sanctity of marriage, but the sanctity of sexuality. And we need a term for this. We desperately need a term for this. A kingdom life not only has integrity, a kingdom life has sexual integrity. That's what it is. A kingdom life has sexual integrity. The thing is, I live in a world that is utterly hostile to this kind of commitment. I am acclimated. I am socialized. I am trained in sexual desire. If you don't believe that, just go pick up a copy of Cosmo or Men's Health. I don't know what they mean by health. Just take a look. I do, and I get a haircut once in a while. page after page after page, I am socialized entirely to have sexual desire. So a kingdom life not only has to be a life that has sexual integrity, a kingdom life has to be sexually subversive. Yes, that's what it is. I have got to be sexually subversive so that I can stand against those currents that are in my world that want to shape my sexual desires. I had the most amazing experience about 2.5 weeks ago. We have a campus at Wheaton College up in northern Wisconsin, way on the north near the boundary areas. It's really crazy up there. We have a campus, it's called Honey Rock near Eagle River. Anyway, it's a great place, it's beautiful. So sometimes January term, we teach an intensive class up there. 2.5 weeks ago was not a good time to be there. So anyway, we went up there. I had 15 students. I had a colleague of mine up there. We had just amazing. It was an advanced theology class. We teach in the morning, and then in the mornings it was 12 below zero with a wind. And there were like 15 inches of snow everywhere on the ground. You'd think that was nice until they said, nope, you can't go outside. Everybody stays inside. What are you going to do? It's really tough. Here, I want to show you a picture. This is my group. Isn't that great? Aren't those fabulous? Those are my students. So what we would do is this. We'd sit around and we would have topics at night around the fireplace. And we say, well, okay, how do you know who you're going to marry someday? That's always a big one. And then I said, you guys, I have to talk about this impossible passage inside of the Sermon on the Mount. So I want to ask you tonight, tell me about your world and sexuality. Can you imagine? They looked at me and they said, really? I said, absolutely. What else are we going to do tonight? We're not going tubing. It went on for over 3 hours in front of a fireplace. It spilled out of them, and I so admired them. They were courageous. I took 4 pages of notes. And the students said to me, this passage, when I read it to them, this passage invites us to talk broadly and honestly about sexuality in all of its dimensions. Here are some of my notes. First of all, I have to tell you, there are some things about sexuality and the way we are socialized that no longer get my attention, no longer interest me. For instance, the internet porn industry. 14% of every Google search has to do with sex. Google, Microsoft, Apple, if you add up all their profits, it doesn't exceed the porn industry. But I'm not interested in that anymore. That's old news. I'm also not interested in celebrity scandals anymore. You know, are we really interested when another celebrity or government leader like David Petraeus, who ran the CIA, falls from his career due to an affair? That's old news. I'm not interested in that any longer. But here is what gets my attention. When I spend 3 hours with my students and they say things like this to me, when they describe to me sexting in their high school, that is the explicit passing of sexual photos, nude photos, from one student to the next in high school. They describe this world to me and I say to myself, oh my gosh, are you sure? Is this right? How can it be? When my students talk to me about how many of their friends are sexually active and how many of them measure their own prowess, their own success socially by their sexual conquests, it gets my attention. One amazing student that I know said to me, Dr. Burge, of 20 of my friends, 8 are sexually active. I said in response, do you think the Christian leaders at your church or your parents know anything about this? And they said to me, no. And they don't want to know. That's sobering. That gets my attention. Up in Wisconsin, my students went on for a half an hour describing the subtle and not so subtle ways in which their world is saturated by sexual imagery. They went on and on and on about that. They were bombarded by that, and they asked me, how can you not have a lustful life with this? They described music to me. I was tempted to bring some to play. I downloaded a little bit of it. I'm not even going to tell you the titles. I was astonished. They talked to me about television, and they said to me, "Are you kidding? Do you ever watch The Bachelor? And do you know what the fantasy suite is?" And I said, "No, I don't. Please fill me in." They talked about internet use, and they said, the temptation and the curiosity feels acute. And the men especially said, "It draws me in. I don't know how to stop it." One student said to me, "This is all about the sweet and deceptive pleasure of forbiddenness." Whoa, take that to the bank. The sweet and deceptive pleasure of forbiddenness. This is the kind of conversation that gets my attention. And it convinces me why we need to talk about sexual integrity with courage. I know 4 young women. They're good friends. They're in their 30s, and they live in a city near Chicago. These 4 women are all single. And they tell me that when they go out on dates with guys, and they're really active going on dates with guys, that these guys commonly think that they ought to have sex with them on the 3rd date. It's standard. And when they say no, they don't think they want to go there, the date dries up. It's finished. And they wonder, they ask me, is there something wrong with my values that I don't want to go down that road? It's sad. They want to be intentional Christians, willing to be sexually countercultural. They don't want us to focus on rules and prohibitions and abstinence talks. They want to resurrect words like virtue and purity and integrity. These are women I admire. I know them well. And they are lonely trying to find men who also have sexual integrity. One of them said to me, "Let's dispense with purity rings for women." You know, purity rings for girls? Let's have integrity rings, which young women put on and which young men put on. That would change the landscape just a little. What do you think of that idea? It's fabulous. So anyway, when I read this passage to my students, and I asked them, I said, what absolutely has to be said here? One woman said this to me, and they all chimed in. They said, name the lies. Name the lies we have heard all of our lives, the lies that no one is willing to say in church. And so I said, you guys, tell me the lies. What are the lies about sexuality and integrity that we need to talk about? And when they did, I recognized every one of them. These are the thoughts of young adults wrestling with sexual integrity. First lie. What I do with my body has no effect on my soul. That's the first lie. What I do with my body has no effect on my soul. Absolutely not. We are creatures knit together by God, body and soul, and therefore we cannot be disembodied. We are together in all of who we are. We are creatures who cannot be separated. We know this, they said. But we are told again and again, our bodies are playgrounds. And our hearts are unaffected. Teach us that our bodies are not playgrounds. Wow. Can you imagine hearing that? Second lie. Intimacy and commitment can be separated. Didn't see this one coming, I didn't. Intimacy and commitment can be separated. No! Are you kidding? Sex is not for recreation outside of a covenant relationship in marriage. One guy said this in our discussion. When intimacy exceeds commitment, you descend into lust and manipulation. I'll say that again. When intimacy exceeds commitment, you descend into lust and manipulation. What do you think of that? It's a remarkable thought. A genius thought. No, intimacy and commitment, you can't separate these. You can't at all. The third lie. You can't live without sex. If you don't have sex, immediately you're going to lose your mind. You are going to go crazy. You are going to be in a therapist's office before you know it. So you had better satisfy this thing. It's everything. Man, did they jump on this. They said, no, sex isn't everything. Love is everything. The problem in our culture is that we have love and sex confused. Love is a deep and profound investment in another person. Sex could be its grammar. But sex alone just turns another person into an object of gratification. That's what our culture is selling. Sex alone turns the other into an object of sexual gratification. You can't go there. Here's the fourth thing that they said to me, the fourth lie. My sexual feelings are sinful. Didn't see that one coming either. My sexual feelings are sinful. And so one young woman said to me, tell everybody, hormones are real. I thought that was really funny. God has made us to be sexual creatures. Our sexuality is a gift of His creative hand. He has given us to it. It is to be celebrated. We are to enjoy our sexuality and to celebrate it within the right context. We should not fill this topic with guilt. And that is what's happened inside of the church. To avoid sexual license, we have filled this topic with guilt. And it has hurt many of us. The fifth lie. If you fail at this, if you fail at sexual integrity, at any point in your life, you're ruined. You're ruined. Every one of my young women told me the same story. One told it and they all said, I know this story. They were 13 years old. And the leader in their Christian group had a plate of cookies. One cookie had a bite taken out of it. And the leader passed the plate around the room to all of the girls in this group. And then everyone took a cookie and just enjoyed it. And when the plate came back to the leader, she said, notice, no one took the cookie with a bite. If you blow it, no one will touch you again. Unbelievable. They all had memories of that experience. Privately, after we were finished, and the fire had gone down, and the students most all went back to their cabins, one student, one young woman, that I care about as if she were my daughter. Oh, I like her. She said, Dr. Burge, I need to talk to you. I am probably the only person sitting here who has been sexually active for much of her adolescence, all through high school. And when I came to Wheaton College, I decided I wasn't going there again. Please say this. God's grace is stronger than any sin you can commit. Amen. God's forgiveness is bigger and greater and stronger than any sin we can commit, and that includes sexual sins. All right then. So we can have a new beginning with this. We understand what Jesus is saying, but we have got to remind ourselves about the goodness of God and the eagerness of God to give us a fresh beginning. The most interesting I heard all evening is this. My students said to me, look, sexuality is related to the consumerism and gluttony of our culture. Really? Sexuality is connected to our consumerism and to our gluttony. We live in a world of unrestrained appetites. We get what we want. We feel entitled. We have an indulgent culture, and even if you can't afford it at the store, you take out a credit card and you go into debt because you deserve to have whatever you see. Whatever your eye delights in, you take it. They said, appetites without restraint. That's what they said to me. So they said, sex has become a commodity. We are guilty of gluttony. We see what we like, we assume we can have it, and we step toward it. And so they said to me, astonishing, they said, teach us to fast. Teach us to fast. To fast sexually. To step away from those things which we think we are supposed to have. Teach us, and these are their words, to have sexual integrity. I didn't make up that phrase, they did. I said, what do you want? They said, sexual integrity. I want to be a young man, a young woman, known for sexual integrity. This is the challenge of the entire Sermon on the Mount. It's integrity. It's that the grace of God is not only changing the way in which you live, but the grace of God is changing the way that you think and feel. It changes you from the inside out, from the outside in. That's what it means to have integrity. A kingdom life is a life with sexual integrity, so that your inner world is not indulged while your outer world is disciplined. It is a life that holds high the preciousness and sacredness of marriage. It is a life that celebrates our sexuality with purity and goodness. That is a life of sexual integrity. For some of us here tonight, this is going to be a very tough assignment. A really tough assignment. You have been doing so well, crafting a life that is pleasing to God, pleasing to yourself, pleasing to those around you, and you say to yourself, I'm not doing bad, I'm happy with this, but you know in your heart of hearts that there is this one thing, this sexual integrity thing that you indulge in privately or with your partner or somewhere. There is this one thing, and you know you want to get it right. Your interior sexual world is in disarray. That's the challenge in the Sermon on the Mount right here. Do you want to be a person of integrity? Do you want to be a person that's known for sexual integrity? Do you want someone who has been able to bring the purity and righteousness and goodness of God right into the center of who you are? And have you struggled with this? At some point, we all have struggled with this. Simply tell God you're sorry. Simply tell the Lord you are sorry and that you want to be forgiven. You want to move on. You want to have a new start with this. That's where you begin. Say, Lord, I'm sorry. I don't want this. I want a private life of righteousness. I want a partnered life of righteousness. I want righteousness through and through. Let God forgive you. Let God forgive you. And remember, never forget that His grace is stronger than anything that you have ever done. He delights in forgiving you. And then ask God to purify you. Ask God to purify your heart. To bring that righteousness that we all can see around your life deep into the center of who you are. Ask God to purify you. So that together all of us will be known as men and women of integrity, But inside of this culture, men and women with sexual integrity. Amen. Amen.